My mandate, which I enjoy today, is to have a small discussion, interaction with you on the topic of constitutional law. But to make things in a proper perspective, I will just refresh your memory with respect to the making of the Indian Constitution. You know, if you trace the history of the Constitution of India, you can trace it back, the roots traces to 1600 AD. But a definite shape of things developed along with the national movement which commenced in the second half of the 19th century. And during the course of the freedom movement or a national movement, which we call variously, parallel to it was the emergence of a regime entrusted with the authority to rule and to develop administrative, legislative, executive, judicial mechanism, platforms and norms. When we think of the Constitution of India in the historical perspective, we come to 1935 Government of India Act. From 1935 to 1949, November 26th, the day on which the Constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly. And by 1947, after the Declaration of Independence, after the enactment by the British Parliament of the Indian Independence Act 1947, you know, the establishment or constitution of the Constituent Assembly for drafting a constitution for India. And if you check with some of the research studies conducted on the subject of this drafting process of the Constitution of India, the Constituent Assembly, as you know, originally had a Constituent Assembly which was bifurcated after the partition of the country. And when the Constituent Assembly for India started deliberation with the 299 members, it took 101 days deliberation for coming to the conclusion with respect to the draft of the Constitution and approval. Once the Constitution is put in place, we know some of the provisions were notified on 26th of November 1949 itself, but the inaugural ceremony came on 26th of January 1950. And the Constitution works. It works again and again. Now it is about 70 years, more than 70 years plus. Our Constitution has been a success. You look around our neighbor countries which have had several constitutions experienced only to be rejected by the whims and fancies of the rulers. Here we have an arrangement so far that Constitution has survived even onslaught by administrative authorities. That is the charm, that is the stature, that is the advantage, merit and the virtue of the Indian Constitution. And we know the Constitution has been administered more than 100 amendments, and some of the amendments have been very controversial, and some of the amendments have resulted in judiciary indulging in very detailed debate on the amendment on the constitution. So we have a document which is above all institutions, above all individuals, above all authorities. To borrow the expression from Dicey, the doyen of constitutional law jurisprudence, A.V. Dicey, we have a rule of law, and the law which rules India is in the Constitution of India. With this rapid introduction, let me take you to the part 3 of the Constitution, as all of you know, dealing with the fundamental rights. See, when you start learning fundamental rights, when you start your interaction with the part on fundamental rights, you are coming to the core of the Constitution, the core competency of the constitutional law. See, I introduced 3 words to you: Constitution, constitutional law, constitutionalism. Constitution is the text. It is the text that you get, having the body of principles with all its chapters. Prior to that, preamble, amending provision, schedules. Then constitutional law. What is specifically, exactly the constitutional law? I have had an opportunity to go through a brilliant autobiography of the topmost jurist of our country, Fali S. Nariman. The name of the textbook is Before the Memory Fades. Venerable Mr. Nariman on one occasion observes that he started practice in 1950, active practice, and he has seen the vicissitudes undergone by the Constitution of India. And the period between 1950 to 2020, if you undertake a pilgrimage of the Constitution or India with this Constitution, you can see the most important area, the most controversial area, the most debated area, discussed area, defeated area is that of the fundamental rights. Constitution was put in place in 1950, January 26th. Within days, came a case before the Supreme Court alleging violation of fundamental rights, alleging right to life and personal liberty, alleging right to freedoms, right to equality, with a blanket allegation that we have only changed our masters, not changed the rule. You may be knowing it, A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras. AIR 1950, Supreme Court 27. See, page 27 of AIR reports this. That means Supreme Court had this case before it during the initial sitting of the court itself. And in A.K. Gopalan's case, the Supreme Court, interpreting the provisions of the Constitution with preventive detention rules, came to the conclusion against A.K. Gopalan, the petitioner. See, fundamental rights begins with a jolt, with a rude shock. And after A.K. Gopalan's decision, Supreme Court, as you know, we have a module called Judicial Review, where we will be discussing in detail the nuances of this adjudicatory process by the Supreme Court. So this I indicated to you from A.K. Gopalan's decision to the privacy decisions of which the Supreme Court delivered of late, and the orders passed in the migrant laborers case last month. It is a saga of, it is a open and shut story of the fundamental rights in the Constitution, enshrined in the Constitution of India. Let me check with you the antecedents of this principle called, this institution called, this paradigm called fundamental rights. Where do we get it? If you ransack the history and see the development of major democratic societies like United Kingdom, like United States of America, Australia, and the like, we see that man has been always at odds with the authorities. It starts right from the days of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They revolted against God because God asked, don't eat the fruits of one particular tree. Why God has decided that, asked us? It is a limitation on our liberty, freedom. But they revolted, they had eaten the fruits of the forbidden tree, and they got punished. But their God's sense of justice was better than the sense of justice of our judges, many of the judges today. Because God knows that they had violated law, but still God gave them a hearing, a fair hearing. After hearing only they were punished. So right from that, you come to the history, legal and constitutional history of England. See, Magna Carta we know, Bill of Rights we know, Petition of Rights we know. Then we have the Constitution of the United States of America. Then we have 1948, the Declaration of Human Rights, Declaration of Rights, Universal Declaration of Rights by under the aegis of the United Nations Organization. So, my submission is, these fundamental rights emerged as a result of man's negotiations with the state authorities, relations with the authorities, interactions with the authorities. In a free nation, in a democracy where there is rule of law, there will be kaleidoscopic situations where man will be pitted against the authorities. So, the result of this interaction is judiciary examining the provisions of the Constitution vis-a-vis the infringement committed by the authority, and the product is constitutional law. The difference between constitution and constitutional law is constitution is the text and constitutional law is the context. What we get from the context of implementing, practicing, putting into force the provisions of the Constitution. From the text we have this contextual result, and Constitutionalism is a texture that we get. It is the ecosystem that is created by the judiciary, by the legislature, by the executive, under the Constitution of India. That is constitutionalism. We are living in an era of constitutionalism because despite amendments to the Constitution has survived. And Constitution has survived largely because of the relevance of, importance of, enforceability of this conscience of the Constitution called Part 3, that is the fundamental rights. See, I will quote two lines from John Keats, the famous poet, English poet. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter still. That we use in a reverse way. These heard violations are remarkable, but what about the unheard violations of fundamental rights? You see, you might have read in the newspapers yesterday or day before yesterday regarding a case which ought to have been tried in the courts of India by some jurisdictional interactions, diplomatic interventions. It was referred to an international tribunal. You know the name of the case, Enrica Lexie. Enrica Lexie tells the story of the murder of two fishermen who were involved in fishing activities on the coastal line of India down south Kerala. And this Italian ship, trespassing into the Indian territorial waters, had an altercation with the fishermen who were angling in the sea, resulting in their murder. You see, the case raised much hue and cry, not only in the judicial parlance, but in the wide open public space also. But what happened is, you see, the fundamental right to get constitutional remedy. This is the only constitution which provides a fundamental right to get constitutional remedy. We boast of being in a rule of law. We boast of having a fundamental right, Article 32, as the right to constitutional remedies. But a small error, a small deviation from the rhythm and method of justice results in injustice. You see, what was these fundamental rights? If you trace the introductory aspects of fundamental rights, the ramifications, dimensions of fundamental rights, the contours of fundamental rights, you see that the Constitution has been live throughout because of the aspect of fundamental rights. A.K. Gopalan's decision, as Professor Ubendra Bakshi rightly told, observed. A.K. Gopalan was Menaka Gandhi's decision marked an obituary note to A.K. Gopalan's case. After that, there has been a fillip to the loose ends of administration of justice with respect to fundamental rights. And in 1975, you might have read in the books and newspapers, the then administration imposed an emergency invoking the provisions of the Constitution, suspending the entire fundamental rights of the citizens. The authorities, the state, the government always fear the citizens. Why? Because of this Charter of Rights called Fundamental Rights. 1975, when national emergency was declared, most of the political leaders who shared different ideology and idea and opinion were imprisoned, put under detention by invoking the drastic rules of MISA and DIR. And the judicial process itself was a very slow moving thing. I will tell you one specific instance in this context. A large number of high courts had to consider applications for habeas corpus writ. The government approached the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court withdrew all the cases to it. And we have that much criticized decision of the Supreme Court, ADM Jabalpur versus Shivakant Shukla, wherein Supreme Court endorsed the emergency regime when it comes to clash with the rights of the citizens, rights of the individuals. You might be remembering, it is a coincidence of incidents that the judge who wrote that judgment, how his son as a judge of the Supreme Court today, and in the privacy case, in Puttaswamy's case, you can read the son has reversed the finding of his father and held that ADM Jabalpur was not a good case, it was not a good decision. See, why I have broken the ground with respect to this constitution and fundamental rights today before you. I want to introduce to you the topic of fundamental rights in the context of the judicial process that is live in this country. So we have had a bird's eye view of the historical developments. Then if you see the drafting of the constitution, one research study has revealed that 14% of the time of the Constituent Assembly was devoted for discussion over the fundamental rights. And almost all members of the Constituent Assembly had participated in one way or other in the discussions on the fundamental rights. So, fundamental rights in part 3, therefore, is a charter as far as the Indians are concerned for a free life, for freedom, for liberty. Let me ask you, let us have the second part of today's discussion by asking a couple of questions to ourselves. Because in jurisprudence you might have studied, law is a living thing. It is never stagnant. It is dynamic and it is always in a developing mode. That is why we look at law as a tool for social reconstruction, social reorganization, maintaining social equations. So the first question I ask for our consideration while discussing fundamental rights in chapter 3, part 3 of the Constitution of India, on a general perspective, who can enjoy these fundamental rights? Who is eligible for fundamental rights? In jurisprudence you study elements of law. You study rights and duties. You study ownership and possession. You study persons, legal persons. You study obligations, liability, procedural, and the like. Who is entitled to enjoy fundamental rights? Are the citizens of India only? Or are all human beings who are within the territory of India entitled to enjoy the fundamental rights? It is available to all human beings in India. But I was coming to this aspect of the eligibility or who is entitled to enjoy the fundamental rights. Who is entitled to get fundamental rights enforced through the courts of law in India? There are certain fundamental rights which are available to all human beings. There are certain fundamental rights which are available only to the citizens of India. But the question is not whether it is available to citizens of India or all human beings within the territory jurisdiction of India. But the scope, the arena, the province of fundamental rights gets expanded. As you know, the Supreme Court has, we will come to that decision and discuss that decision also in due course, has had an occasion to say that even a corporate entity which is a legal person has got a fundamental right. It can enforce the fundamental rights. If it can enforce the fundamental rights, court on a subsequent decision held that it can be prosecuted also for an offence. That is another thing. Now you might have seen, at least in a section of the press, it has come. The Uttarakhand High Court has passed an order saying that the rivers also, our rivers also have got fundamental rights. Whereas the New Zealand constitution already had ingrained this concept into their constitution, and their court has accepted it. When an elephant is killed, or when an elephant's death in Kerala, in forest, a wild elephant, due to the mischievous act of a local resident, it affected the sentiments and sensibilities of the people across the globe, and even the media, or international media, noticed it and criticized it. So, my submission is, the concept of fundamental right, its origin in a narrow, humble scape, has developed, it has reached the high seas of jurisprudence today, not limited to citizens of a nation, not limited to human beings, not limited to any particular entity, but it is getting expanded and expanded again and again. Why? What is the reason for this? The reason for this is the close proximity of fundamental rights to natural law. Natural law. See, what is natural law? Natural law, you know, it is part of the definitional problem of law itself, natural law. Here I would like to add one more aspect, simply by saying that human beings, citizens, other entities, even animals enjoy fundamental rights. But if you have to use the word enjoy, the question of real enjoyment of fundamental rights emerges. I told you about emergency in 1975. I told you about Maneka Gandhi's decision in 1978. And I told, and we will be discussing in somewhat detail, the growth of constitutional law, the growth of judicial process, the development of tools, several tools, acceptance, recognition of several mode of enforcement of fundamental rights they have broad-based the reach of fundamental rights. And especially in the 80s, we had a team of judges on the benches of the Supreme Court of India who had initiated through a number of decisions, epoch-making decisions, which called social action litigations or public interest litigations, increasing, expanding, enlarging the scope of the Constitution, scope of the fundamental right, scope of the constituency of the fundamental right. So today, with this position that is available, enjoyment of fundamental rights, those who are entitled to enjoy fundamental rights, the position is very clear. As far as India is concerned, more clearer and well established compared to other nations. I will tell you two examples, two instances to prove that fundamental rights, as far as India is concerned, has achieved a rare distinction. One is, I have mentioned already, this institutionalizing this public interest litigation or a social action litigation. Another is the emergence, recognition, enforcing the principles of human rights. You see, fundamental rights are used synonymous to human rights. And India is one of the major democracies to recognize and institutionalize the implementation of enforcement of the principles of fundamental rights. You know, in 1992, we have the Protection of Human Rights Act, whereas the jurisdiction from where we have drawn our parliamentary system and larger principles of the constitutional law, constitution, United Kingdom, they could enact a legislation only in 1998. On one occasion, a judge of the House of Lords, which is now called Supreme Court of United Kingdom, observed that India is ahead of, we have learned several things from India, Indian judiciary, Indian judicial process with respect to this recognition of human rights. In United States of America also, even though they are basking under the glare of exceptionalism, which we know, they don't take any examples from other jurisdictions. Americans and American jurisprudence, American judges say that in our constitution we have everything. We don't want anything from anybody outside for understanding the constitution. That is called exceptionalism. But India, being what it is, a broader democracy, we have taken good things from all jurisdictions. We have opened not only our windows but our doors also for fresh ideas to come, and we have this human rights jurisprudence. That is why jurists have said that the Supreme Court of India has not merely been interpreting the Constitution of India, but it has been rewriting the Constitution in certain vital areas, and that vital area is this fundamental rights. You know a case, probably the most epoch-making case ever decided by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court bench consisting of the largest number of judges, 13 judges bench. Fortunately, then Supreme Court only had 14 judges. One judge was not included for getting an odd number of judges on the bench. And the 13 judges bench, you know the name of the case also, Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala. Even before you join for law course, you get acquainted with Keshavananda Bharati's case, which is otherwise called the fundamental rights case. And if you see the record of precedents laid down by the Supreme Court of India, judicial precedents, the largest number of citing of decisions, previous decisions, is with respect to one of the judgments is Keshavananda Bharati's decision. See, the fundamental rights with Keshavananda Bharati's decision, otherwise persons were, you are entitled to enjoy fundamental rights, but you cannot enjoy the fundamental rights. The dish is served, food is served to you, but you can't eat it. That was the condition. But judges like Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer, an apostle of fundamental rights and apostle of human rights, they recognized, they opened up a huge sector for the ordinary people. You know, in 1982, when the Asiad Stadium was under construction, the Asiad workers case came. When now we fight this migrant laborers case in Supreme Court, the foundation was laid by the Supreme Court in 1980s itself with Asiad workers case. Such is the solemnity, such is the sanctity, such is the serenity of the fundamental rights that you cannot tamper with it. You cannot, that is inextricable right, inalienable right, fundamental right, that is basic right, plenary right available to an individual, a citizen, a person, an entity. And Justice Krishnaiyer said even a prisoner has got fundamental rights, even if he is imprisoned. You know the decision, Charles Shobaraj versus Tihar Jail authorities, decided by Supreme Court by Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer. Justice Krishnaiyer observes that a prisoner while coming to the prison, he is a guest of the government of India, state, guest of the state. He does not shed his fundamental rights at the prison gate. He comes into the prison. That is why we cry foul when prison conditions are not conducive for human life. A number of decisions are there with respect to the prison life also. So, our first point, this enforceability, people enjoying the fundamental rights, irrespective of age, irrespective of area, irrespective of nationality, India's rule of law. In the showcase of rule of law, our best product is the fundamental rights in part 3 of the Constitution of India. See, the second question which I asked to ourselves for our deliberation, against whom these fundamental rights are available to you? Against whom these fundamental rights are available to us? If you read the Constitution and Article 12 of the Constitution, Article 12 says the state, the concept of state under Article 12 is different from the concept of state under the political theory and political science. The concept of state under Article 12 of the Constitution of India is for the purpose of understanding, implementing and enforcing the fundamental rights. You cannot take refuge under the age-old saying that a king can do no wrong. King can do wrong and king can be wronged also. That is the position now. So against whom? Is it to the government? Is it against the government only? We will be discussing it in detail while discussing the contents or ingredients of Article 12 of the Constitution of India. And today, the concept of state, this enforceability of fundamental rights has come outside. It was being imprisoned by the concept of state for a while. Now it has come out of this imprisonment, or it has come out of this what you call this limitations imposed by the concept of state and wired into open. Even now today the Supreme Court, now the position is that this is available even against private entities, not exclusively state. If a private entity is discharging a public function, your fundamental rights are enforceable against that private entity. You have it in TMA Pai's decision by 11 judges bench of the Supreme Court. And even before that, in 1989, one case called AVMS Trust versus Rudani's decision, court said that even judicial review of private action is possible for enforcing the purpose of fundamental rights. Court had relied on a British decision of R versus Panel of Takeovers and Mergers, which also we will refer to while discussing this locus standi. So against whom? Against government, against state, against any entity, any legal entity which is discharging a public function, public duty, public obligation to act public. That is it. Now, my third question, which we ask, we wind up today's discussion with this third question. What are the remedies? What are the remedies? Ubi societas ibi jus is the maxim. As is the society, so is the law. So if there is a law, there should be a remedy for the infringement of it. If there is a law, if there is a regime, if there is the right vested in you through the law, through the constitution, there should be something for enforcing the right also. Because it cannot be mere slogans. Mere slogans cannot make rights. You remember, you have studied the history of French Revolution, which also had energized or inspired the history of India in the matter of drafting our constitution. French Revolution, which came out with the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. French Revolution is probably one of the most historic events in the civilization of man. And I will tell you a small story. You might have heard of William Wordsworth, the English poet. It was Wordsworth's youth age. He was a youth when French Revolution was being fought. Hearing news about the French Revolution, when there was a perpetual fight between the Parliament and the King in England that time, when liberties of Englishmen were jeopardized by the administration, hearing the glad tidings, good news from the mainland of Europe, Wordsworth crossed the British Channel, English Channel, to see the French Revolution by his own eyes. And Wordsworth says in one poem, bliss was in that dawn to be alive. To be young was very heaven. Bliss was in that dawn to be alive. To be young was very heaven. But when Wordsworth went to France, when he visited, he saw guillotine being used. Guillotine used to kill people, large number of people together. And French Revolution was eaten by the counter-revolution by Napoleon and other regime. So if the mere rights, giving mere rights in the law, in the text of law, is not sufficient. It should be enforced. It should be enforced against the most monstrous power. State may use its power against you in a most monstrous way. It is one thing to have the power of a giant and another thing to use it like a giant. We have heard this saying. State often uses it like a giant. And that is being questioned. Maneka Gandhi was a student in 1978. She was, her passport was impounded by the government of India. So she approached the Supreme Court with a writ petition. And Supreme Court had an occasion to diagnose the ills of justice in India. And Supreme Court did it, even though Maneka Gandhi did not get a relief in the case. We have got, the succeeding generations got relief, where Supreme Court dictated the terms for using power under the Constitution of India. So, with these preliminary introductory things, we will pass on to other areas of the constitutional law assigned to me. You know that fundamental rights are categorized under different categories. Introductory provisions are there in Article 12 and 13. Equality provisions are there from 14 to 18. Then freedoms under Article 19. Then liberty under Article 21. Then right to what do you call against in criminal trial and prosecution, Article 20, 22. You may perhaps know that the Constitution of India mentions only one profession among other professions. It does not mention about chartered accountants, doctors, or engineers. It mentions only about lawyers. Article 22 says that it is a fundamental right of a person to choose his own counsel, his own lawyer, a lawyer of his choice. That is the significance of the Constitution. Constitution draftsmen, the makers, had understood that unless you have a cadre of good lawyers and good judges, this document will not work. So then we have this religious freedom in Article 25 to 28, 25, 26, 27 and 28. Then we have freedom to the right of minorities on 29 and 30. Then right to property, which has been amended and taken away from the fundamental rights, but still we have to discuss some of the jurisprudential aspects of the right to property. Then we have constitutional remedies, which is the trump card for us in understanding the fundamental rights under Part 3 of the Constitution.